At 5 a.m. in New York, the sun and the moon rise together in Aquarius. And that matters because this is not a sky that tells you what to feel. It's a sky that makes you notice how you're feeling, especially when the world expects something else from you. This is not an emotionally charged sky in the traditional sense. It does not push feeling to the surface or demand expression. Instead, it brings awareness forward. Thoughts arrive early. Perception sharpens before emotion fully wakes up. There is a sense that the mind is already scanning the day, while the body is still deciding how present it wants to be. This matters, especially because today is Valentine's Day, a day that often comes with expectations about how you are supposed to feel, what you are supposed to want, and how connection is supposed to look. Under an Aquarius sky, those expectations stand out more clearly, not to shame them, not to reject them, but to notice them. Aquarius energy does not merge easily with scripts. It asks for honesty over performance, perspective over intensity. You may notice a subtle gap between what the day represents culturally and what you actually feel internally. At the same time, Mercury and Venus are both in Pisces, softening the sharpness of that awareness. This brings memory, sensitivity, and emotional nuance into the picture. Feelings may drift in quietly rather than announcing themselves. You might feel touched by something small, a song, a thought, a passing memory. Pisces does not require you to act on emotion, it simply allows it to exist. So the inner climate becomes a blend of clarity and softness, distance and tenderness, awareness and empathy. The inner shift this creates is subtle but important. Instead of being pulled outward by expectation, attention turns inward. You may feel less compelled to prove what you feel and more interested in understanding it. There can be a sense of calm detachment that is not cold, but spacious. A feeling of being present without needing to perform presence. This is the foundation of the day, a sky that invites you to observe rather than react, to notice rather than exaggerate, to be with what is real, even if it is quieter than expected. As this Aquarian tone settles in, the experience of the day often begins to show itself in the body before it becomes a clear thought. Many people notice that something feels slightly different as they move through the early hours. The body feels awake but not rushed, alert but not tense. It can feel like you are present without being pulled forward yet, as if your system is scanning the environment before deciding how much energy to offer. One of the first places this shows up is in the head and jaw. With the sun and moon in Aquarius, the mind tends to stay active, even when the rest of the body wants to remain neutral. You might notice a subtle tightness in the jaw, a clenching you were not aware of, or a feeling that your thoughts are already forming explanations and interpretations. This is not anxiety, it is mental engagement happening early, before emotion fully enters the picture. At the same time, Mercury and Venus in Pisces soften the emotional field. This often shows up in the chest and throat. The chest may feel open but tender, as if something wants to be felt but not named yet. The throat might feel quieter than usual, less interested in speaking, more inclined to listen or pause. Pisces does not push expression. It allows sensation to move slowly, sometimes without words. As the morning progresses, Mars and Jupiter in Cancer begin to make themselves known. This combination often brings awareness to emotional effort stored in the body. Shoulders can feel heavy, as if you are carrying more responsibility than you realized. The stomach may tighten slightly when you think about obligations, plans, or expectations connected to the day. This is especially common when caring for others has been a long-standing pattern in your life. You might notice moments of irritation that do not have a clear target. A short breath when a message comes in, a sense of resistance when thinking about showing up in a certain way. These signals are not asking you to withdraw completely. They are asking you to notice how much energy is being spent automatically. Cancer energy stores memory in the body, especially around care and protection. Today, that memory can surface as physical sensation. With Saturn and Neptune both at the beginning of Aries, there can also be a feeling of hesitation in the body, a pause before action. You may stand still for a moment longer than usual before responding, choosing, or moving. This pause is important. It is the nervous system checking whether an old response still fits. You might feel both the urge to act and the desire to rest, creating a mild internal contradiction. Throughout the day, clarity and sensitivity coexist physically. One moment you feel steady and clear, the next slightly vulnerable or inward. Neither state is wrong. The body is adjusting to a day that does not demand performance, but awareness. If you listen closely to these small signals, they provide guidance that is quieter, but often more accurate than habit. As the day moves further into motion, this inner state begins to touch everyday life in very practical ways. You may notice it first in how you approach work, communication, or simple decisions. Tasks that usually feel automatic might require a bit more conscious choice today. Not because they are harder, but because you are more aware of the energy they ask from you. With the sun and moon still anchoring the day in Aquarius, there is often a desire to step back from autopilot. You might find yourself questioning routines you normally don't think twice about. The meeting you usually agree to without hesitation, the text you reply to immediately, the plan you follow because it's already on the calendar. Today there is a pause before those actions, a moment where you notice yourself asking, even silently, do I actually want to engage with this right now? In work settings, this can show up as a preference for clarity over speed. You may feel less inclined to jump into emotional conversations or navigate interpersonal dynamics that feel unclear. Aquarius energy favors objectivity, so you might notice yourself wanting to keep things clean, factual, and contained. This can be helpful, but it can also create a sense of distance if others are expecting warmth or enthusiasm. That difference in pacing is not a flaw. It's simply a mismatch of rhythms that becomes more visible today. Mercury in Pisces adds another layer. Communication may feel softer, less direct, or slightly vague. Emails might take longer to write. Conversations may drift from their original point. You could notice yourself rereading messages, wondering about tone or subtext. This is where awareness matters. Pisces can blur edges, especially when combined with an Aquarian tendency to analyze. If you find yourself overthinking what someone meant, it may help to come back to what was actually said rather than what could be implied. In personal interactions, especially on Valentine's Day, the contrast between inner experience and outer expectation can be more pronounced. You might feel pressure to express affection in a certain way, or to participate in rituals that don't fully match your current emotional state. Mars and Jupiter in Cancer highlight how much effort goes into emotional caretaking. This can show up as feeling responsible for making others feel comfortable, included, or reassured. You may notice how automatic it is, reassuring before anyone asks, adjusting your tone to keep things smooth, saying yes because explaining yourself feels like too much work. None of this is dramatic, but all of it costs energy. These are small moments, but they add up. Today, the body often signals this before the mind catches up. A slight tightening when you say yes, a shallow breath after a conversation, a sense of depletion that doesn't quite make sense given what actually happened. There can also be an opportunity hidden in these moments. The opportunity is not to withdraw completely, but to notice choice. Saturn at the beginning of Aries brings attention to where action begins. Even a small shift, like taking a few extra seconds before responding, changes the dynamic. That pause allows you to respond from awareness rather than habit. As the afternoon continues, energy may fluctuate. You might feel mentally clear but emotionally reserved, or emotionally open but physically tired. This unevenness is part of the day's rhythm. It's not a sign that something is off. It's the system adjusting to a quieter, more conscious way of engaging. In simple terms, today asks you to notice where your energy goes in ordinary moments. Not to judge it, not to optimize it, just to see it. In that seeing, small adjustments naturally happen, and often those adjustments create more ease than any big decision ever could. As these experiences layer together, a central pattern begins to take shape. The core theme of the day isn't emotional intensity, it's emotional effort. The kind that leaks out quietly, not because you choose it, but because it's become habit. More specifically, the way effort quietly leaks out through habits of care, responsibility, and expectation that often go unnoticed. This is not a dramatic pattern. It does not announce itself loudly. It shows up in small, cumulative ways that become easier to see under today's sky. With Mars and Jupiter both in Cancer, the instinct to care is amplified. Cancer energy is deeply attuned to emotional environments. It tracks mood, safety, and comfort almost automatically. Mars here acts on that instinct, while Jupiter expands it. Together they can create a sense that you are responsible for maintaining emotional balance around you, even when no one explicitly asks for it, even when you are already tired. This pattern often looks like over-functioning in subtle forms, checking in one extra time, softening your needs so others feel at ease, holding space when you don't quite have the capacity. None of these actions are inherently wrong. In fact, they often come from genuine care. The issue is not the caring itself, but the lack of awareness around how much it costs. Today, the body becomes the messenger. You may feel fine mentally, but physically depleted, or emotionally neutral, but strangely heavy. This disconnect is a clue. It suggests that energy is being spent in places that no longer register consciously. When effort becomes automatic, it stops feeling like a choice. That's where depletion begins. The Aquarian influence helps make this visible. Aquarius steps back far enough to see patterns rather than isolated moments. Under this influence, you might suddenly notice how often you are the one adjusting, how often you anticipate needs before they're spoken, how rarely you pause to check whether you actually want to engage. This noticing is not meant to provoke guilt or self-criticism. It is meant to restore agency. Another layer of this pattern is emotional performance. Valentine's Day amplifies this theme culturally. There is an unspoken script about how connection should look, feel, and be expressed. Today's astrology gently disrupts that script. The distance created by Aquarius allows you to see where performance has replaced presence, where gestures are done out of expectation rather than alignment. This does not mean withdrawing affection or becoming detached. It means noticing when expression becomes effortful, when saying the right thing feels heavier than being silent, when showing up requires more energy than you have available. These are not failures, they are signals. What makes this pattern especially important today is the presence of Saturn at the very beginning of Aries. This marks the start of a longer cycle around self-directed action. But before action comes awareness. Saturn here slows things down just enough for you to feel where effort begins, where it tips from choice into obligation. That threshold is subtle, and today helps illuminate it. So the core pattern of the day is not about doing less or caring less. It is about noticing where care has become automatic rather than intentional, where energy leaks because no one, including you, pauses to ask if it is still needed. Under today's sky, that pause becomes possible, and in that pause, something begins to reorganize, quietly and without force. To understand why this pattern is so present today, it helps to look again at the underlying astrological structure, not as theory, but as a mirror for lived experience. The sky is carrying a strong mix of air and water, with a subtle but important ignition point beginning in fire. That combination explains why awareness is high, emotion is present, and action feels tentative all at once. The sun and moon in Aquarius set the overall tone. Aquarius creates distance not to avoid feeling, but to observe it. When both lights are here, the inner world naturally pulls back far enough to see patterns. This is why so many people notice their habits today instead of being swept up in them. The emotional script becomes visible because you are no longer fully inside it. That alone explains the sense of quiet clarity that runs through the day. Mercury and Venus in Pisces add the emotional undercurrent. Pisces does not operate through logic or linear thinking. It moves through sensation, memory, and subtle emotional cues. With both planets here, feeling is present but diffuse. You may sense something without being able to define it. Emotion flows, but it does not anchor itself to clear conclusions. This is why interpretation can feel slippery today, and why overthinking emotional signals leads to confusion rather than clarity. The real weight of the day, however, comes from Mars and Jupiter in Cancer. Cancer is where emotional memory lives in the body. It stores patterns of care, protection, and responsibility formed over time. Mars activates these patterns. Jupiter enlarges them. Together, they bring old emotional roles to the surface, especially roles related to caregiving, emotional management, and holding space for others. This is why effort feels heavier, not because more is being asked of you, but because you are becoming aware of how much has already been given. Saturn at 0 degrees Aries is the quiet pivot point. 0 degrees always marks a beginning, but Saturn beginnings are slow and deliberate. Saturn here is not pushing you to assert yourself dramatically. It is simply showing you where action begins, where you hesitate, where your body pauses before responding. That pause is not weakness. It is the nervous system checking whether an old response still fits a new internal reality. Neptune, sitting next to Saturn in Aries, adds uncertainty to that moment of pause. Desire and direction are not fully aligned yet. You may feel the impulse to move forward without clarity about how. This can feel uncomfortable, especially for people used to certainty before action. But this transitional space is exactly where patterns loosen. When clarity is delayed, habit loses its grip. Pluto in Aquarius continues to work beneath everything, slowly reshaping how you relate to collective expectations. It asks quiet questions about roles, identities, and social scripts, especially around connection and belonging. On a day like today, Pluto's influence makes it harder to blindly follow inherited definitions of love, effort, or responsibility. Taken together, these transits explain why the day feels reflective rather than expressive, why effort becomes visible, why pauses matter. The astrology is not creating the pattern, it is revealing one that has been operating quietly for a long time. There is an old lens many people still carry when they experience a day like this. If the emotions are quieter, they assume something is missing. If the intensity drops, they wonder whether they care enough. If they do not feel compelled to perform connection, they question their own depth. Under today's sky, that interpretation is exactly what is being challenged. Aquarius does not reduce feeling, it reframes it. Emotional distance here is not numbness, it's space. And space is often where honesty finally becomes possible. Space allows you to see what is real rather than what is expected. When the sun and moon sit together in Aquarius, they invite you to witness your emotional habits from a slight remove. You are close enough to feel, but far enough to observe. That position can feel unfamiliar if you are used to measuring connection through intensity or effort. Pisces, through Mercury and Venus, ensures that sensitivity is still present. You are not being asked to shut down or harden. You are being asked to stop forcing meaning. Feeling does not need to be explained today. Care does not need to be proven. Love does not need to be demonstrated on cue. What once looked like detachment begins to reveal itself as discernment. This is where the reframe happens. The absence of emotional urgency does not mean absence of care. It often means presence without pressure. When you are not busy managing impressions or outcomes, you can actually notice what you feel. The quiet becomes informative. The pause becomes meaningful. You start to sense which connections feel natural and which ones require constant effort. Mars and Jupiter in Cancer bring this reframe into sharper relief. Many people have learned to equate caring with doing more. More checking in, more adjusting, more holding. Today exposes how that equation quietly drains energy. When effort becomes the proof of love, rest begins to feel like neglect. This is the belief being gently undone. Saturn at the beginning of Aries supports this shift. It does not demand that you change your behavior immediately. It simply asks you to notice where action no longer feels aligned, where your body resists the old response. That resistance is not rebellion, it is feedback. Neptune's presence nearby adds compassion to this process. You are allowed to be unsure while redefining what care looks like. So the reframe is not dramatic, it is simple and profound. Emotional presence does not require performance. Clarity does not require intensity. And choosing not to overextend does not mean you are withdrawing love. It often means you are learning how to stay connected without disappearing into effort. Moving through the day becomes lighter when the focus shifts from fixing the experience to integrating it. Integration today is not about doing something right. It is about understanding what your system is already communicating and allowing that information to guide small, natural adjustments. With Mercury in Pisces, the mind may continue to drift between thoughts, memories, and imagined outcomes. Instead of trying to organize those thoughts, it helps to ground attention gently, not through effort, but through presence. Feeling your feet when you stand, noticing your breath when you pause, letting your eyes rest on something ordinary. These small moments anchor you back into the body, where the signals are clearer and less distorted by interpretation. Venus in Pisces supports a softer relationship with care and connection. Integration here means allowing affection to be simple, a kind word without explanation, a moment of shared quiet. Choosing something that feels genuinely nourishing rather than impressive. When you follow that impulse, you may notice a subtle easing in the body, a sign that you are no longer performing care, but inhabiting it. Lilith in Cancer adds another layer. She brings honesty about emotional boundaries that are usually unspoken. Integration today may look like protecting your inner space without needing to justify it. You are allowed to be selective about where your emotional energy goes. You are allowed to respond at your own pace. This is not withdrawal. It is self-trust beginning to take shape. Saturn at the start of Aries reminds you that integration often begins with restraint rather than action. The pause before responding, the moment of checking in with yourself before agreeing. These are not delays, they are recalibrations. Each pause reinforces the idea that your responses are choices, not obligations. As the day unfolds, you may notice that doing less internally creates more room externally. Conversations feel clearer, decisions feel cleaner. There is less need to manage outcomes. Integration is happening quietly, without ceremony. You are not changing who you are simply aligning more closely with what feels sustainable. This is how the day supports you, not by asking for transformation, but by allowing awareness to settle into the body and guide behavior naturally. When you let that happen, the day moves with less friction and more ease, even if nothing about it looks dramatic from the outside. As the day comes to a close, the sky does not ask for a conclusion. There is no final emotional note to hit, no moment where everything needs to make sense. The sun and moon remain in Aquarius, holding the day in a wide, spacious awareness. What mattered was not what happened, but what you noticed while it was happening. The small pauses, the moments of restraint, the places where you chose presence over performance, even quietly. If you look back on the day, you may realize that nothing dramatic needed to shift for something meaningful to settle. Perhaps you did not overextend where you usually would. Perhaps you let a feeling exist without explaining it. Perhaps you noticed a pattern you had never named before. These are not minor things. They are the kinds of internal adjustments that accumulate over time, changing how you relate to yourself and others without forcing change. This is the tone Saturn and Neptune set together at the start of Aries. Not a push forward, but a gathering of awareness before movement. You are allowed to end the day without answers. You are allowed to rest without resolution. The astrology supports integration rather than outcome, and that integration often continues long after the day itself is over. If there is anything to carry with you tonight, let it be a simple recognition. Emotional honesty does not require intensity. Care does not require exhaustion. Presence does not require explanation. When you allow those truths to settle, even briefly, the nervous system softens, the body exhales, the mind quiets just enough. As you move into the evening, notice what feels sustainable. Notice what does not ask you to become someone else. That noticing is the real work of days like this. If this way of looking at the day gave you even a small moment of recognition, you're welcome to stay with the channel. We're not here to predict your life. We're here to help you notice it more clearly. We continue exploring astrology not as prediction, but as a grounded lens for understanding lived experience. Thank you for taking this time with yourself today.